Okay, so let's get started. You should be able to see my screen. Yep, good. I can see some nods. That's reassuring. I'm going to start this talk with a short video. So let me just play that. Whoops. Okay. What we've seen there is there's different customs, there's different behaviors which are considered normal in some parts of the world, which we might kind of find a little bit eccentric or different to what we're used to in our own cultures there. So we've all got our own set of values as an individual, a set of values and behaviors within our own culture. Now, if we think about Agile itself is a set of values. Agile comes from the manifesto for Agile software development. And at its core, Agile is made up of the four values: individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. So when we look at how we implement Agile, we might be thinking about things such as Scrum or XP, particular practices or tools like test-driven development or user stories or velocity story points, DSDM. The frameworks and the tools become almost unlimited, and more ways of implementing agility are emerging all the time. However, at its core, Agile is that mindset described by the four values of the Agile Manifesto, backed up by the 12 principles. And if we think about those different behaviors and customs that we have as individuals, our culture, how do these two align with each other? Are we actually talking about a culture shift when we are adopting Agile ways of working? So this is what I want to talk to you about today. So the talk will be about 40 minutes. We'll have time for Q&A towards the end. I'm going to share some theory, some background as to this idea of culture and how that aligns with Agile. And then the second half of the talk will be looking at some different case studies of Agile in action in different parts of the world. So let me just do some introductions first. So my name is David Spinks. This is me here when I had shorter hair. On the left-hand side is my business partner, Claudia Califano. We are both Scrum.org trainers we are accredited Kanban trainers with Kanban University. We've been Agile practitioners around about 20 years experience between the two of us. You've just got me today. Claudia's not joining us. We're also the co-founders of a company called Red Tangerine, and we launched a book this year called Agile Across Borders. So this talk is basically how we arrived at this book and all the research that kind of went into it. So let me start by giving you some background. Claudia is actually from the Netherlands originally. She's a bit of a cultural hybrid herself. She's half Italian, half Dutch, and she moved to the UK around about 2005. I'm from the UK. I've born and bred here, and we met when we were working at the same company as Scrum Masters around about 2013. And we got into these conversations around some of the interesting things that we do in the UK, some of our cultural customs, such as using the word interesting. It's an example of what we call British coded speech. Now, if any of you has worked with British people, I'm sure some of you would have experienced this. I saw that we do have some people from the UK here, so some of you might be familiar with this way of behaving. So we say things like interesting, when really what we mean is, that's a stupid idea, that's a stupid suggestion. We say things like, we're certainly going to consider that, when really we mean, nah, we're not going to do that. We're not going to think about that. Now, as a British person, I understand the nuances. I understand the coded speech which is going on here. But for someone from the Netherlands, like Claudia is, when you say, we're certainly going to consider it, they think, great, my idea is being taken seriously. The Dutch are very direct. They say what they mean. Compare that to the British when we use this British coded speech, and what we're going to get is misunderstandings, right? And if you think about it, the Netherlands and the UK, we're just separated by a small stretch of water. We're not that culturally different. And then when you think about the whole world, the potential for misunderstandings are great. Let's look at another couple of examples. I'm going to show another video.
What do you mean by that?
So two teams very evenly balanced today?
You think so?
Well, I'm asking you.
You think so, really? You think that's a question?
I'm asking you because you were smiling with him at the end. Was it an acknowledgement that you'd balanced
smiling because he's my friend. No, I was not speaking about the game. You think the game was like that?
I was asking because you were smiling with him.
I can smile if I lose, if I win, if I draw. There's nothing to do. You are asking a question about the game. You think the game was like you are saying?
No, that's not what I said. I didn't say what I think. I'm asking you what you think. I'm sorry. That's just what I'm asking.
I'm sorry to say, but it's a silly question.
Okay.
When a team crossed the midfield line once in 90 minutes, and the other team is for 90 minutes with the ball in the opponent half, trying and trying and trying and trying, you are telling me that one team canceled the other one and each other. We didn't have to defend. We didn't defend. We had the ball all the time, and David De Gea was sleeping, and because he was sleeping, he made that funny thing. I was laughing with that funny thing because he's...
That was Jose Mourinho, football manager from Portugal. This was an interview when he was manager of Manchester United. And you can see again that we had a lot of tension in that interview. The British interviewer was getting very flustered. He was apologizing, almost turned into Hugh Grant at one point. At the same time, you had Jose Mourinho showing his emotions very openly, and then he kind of went into this long rant and monologue towards the end there. So there's an example of two people with very different communication styles and a real clash of culture. Let's look at another example.
The financial crisis has, of course, had an effect across the board. Some people think even Formula One will be hit by the privations of the coming years. Let's see what former world champion Mika Hakkinen has to say about this.
Do you think that Formula One does need to look at cutting its costs?
Yes. And he's a racing driver, is he?
Yeah.
0 to yes in 60 seconds.
So that was Mika Hakkinen, the Formula One driver. And we can kind of look at him and think he's eccentric, not much of a talker. And as we saw there, that British comedy show was kind of like taking the mickey out of him, having a good laugh at his expense. But really, Mika Hakkinen was just showing typical Finnish communication style. There's nothing eccentric about Mika Hakkinen. He's just Finnish. So why is this important in the context of Agile? I've got on screen here 3 of the principles behind the Agile Manifesto. So we've got business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. Business people and developers working together. Next one, the most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. And then lastly, at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. So these 3 principles are showing us the importance of communication and collaboration for successful Agile teams. The really great Agile teams have got really good communication, collaboration, and understanding of each other as a team. Okay, so we're trying to avoid these cultural misunderstandings that we have. And then that last principle that we see at the bottom, I just want to draw your attention to the fact that we're talking about tuning and adjusting our behavior. We're almost asking Agile teams to change their cultural values here, to change what is normal for them. Okay, so this is why I think this idea of cultural awareness is important for Agile teams. But let's just step back a moment. What do we mean by culture? Let's not fall into stereotyping and just thinking about our national culture. There's many different factors that make up our culture as an individual, not just our nationality, but the region from which we're from within a nation. I'm sure those of you from the UK will appreciate the culture in London is very different to the north of England, for example. Our professional or education background, our gender, our class, our religious beliefs, generational differences, our ethnicity, the culture at our workplace, so the corporate culture. All of these things are factors that make up our culture as an individual. Now, a few years ago, Glaudio and I started seeing posts and articles appearing like this. Scrum doesn't work in China. This was one that we found written by Bas Vode. Bas Vode is the co-creator of the LESS framework. So some of you have probably heard of him. We saw other articles such as 5 reasons why Agile does not work in Germany and what to do about it. Questioning if Agile works in Asia. This one on the top right-hand side, this was written by a German Agile coach after he'd moved to Colombia. And he was talking about what he needed to do to adjust his approach to have Agile working with the teams that he was working with. More recently, the bottom right was an article that I found just about 2 weeks ago around Scrum being adopted in the Ivory Coast and the challenges that they were seeing there. So this leads to the sorts of questions. Is Agile suitable for some cultures more than others? What impact does our culture have on Agile adoption? So Glaudio and I, we started looking into this, and we found that there's been very little research into this area. Now, there is a lot of writing, a lot of research into cultural models, understanding culture standalone. Some of you might be familiar with the Hofstadter model. so created by Gert Hofstadter and his team. There's other work by the likes of Fons Trampenaars and Charles Hampton Turner. We were particularly drawn to the work of Richard D. Lewis. So I want to share some of the thinking and ideas around creating cultural models to help us to understand our cultural differences. So Richard D. Lewis's seminal work was this book, When Cultures Collide. It sold over 1 million copies worldwide, and it's been published in 15 different languages. It's based on his work visiting 135 countries around the world, and he spent significant time working in 20 of those. Now, what Lewis wanted to do was to create a cultural model to allow leaders to have something to refer to in order to create strategies to lead cross-culturally. Rich D. Lewis, he found that he believed that human behavior could be classified into 3 main groups. So this is what he did. He created 3 simple groupings. And he named these linear active, multi-active, and reactive. So linear active, let's just go through some of the behaviors that we see in these groups. The linear active group, the behaviors that we see here are where people like to have step-by-step plans, work on one thing at a time. Linear active behaviors are such that people can partly conceal their feelings. They confront with logic, so they bring logic to their arguments. Linear active behaviors are where people are very job orientated. They respect hierarchy and officialdom. Contrast that to the multi-active set of behaviors. Multi-actives are very talkative. They are comfortable multitasking. They display their emotions very openly. They are they're people orientated. If we look at the reactive group, they're even more people orientated than the multi-actives. The reactives are the great listeners. For them, a sense of harmony and ceremony is really important. So a big part of reactive culture is not to lose face. What we mean by that is not to cause embarrassment to others or cause embarrassment to themselves. So that's really important. So Lewis took his 3 categorizations and he created this visualization, which he called the Lewis model. And as we can see, he's placed the 3 categories at the 3 points of the triangle, and he's mapped different countries depending on how strongly the societies exhibit behaviors from the 3 groupings. Now, it's important to say that the model is relative, okay? It's never going to be the case that a society or a person is just one category. There's always going to be a mixture of the behaviors from the 3 groups. It's just a question of which ones dominate most. So we're not stereotyping here. We're trying to avoid that. So as we can see in the bottom left-hand side, we've got the linear active group, societies such as the UK, Germany, USA, so very much Western Europe and North America are strongly linear active. Multi-active groups we see in the Mediterranean, South America, so the likes of Italy, Spain, Brazil, Colombia, etc. Bottom right-hand side, largely countries that we see in the east of Asia, so the likes of China, Japan, Vietnam. Now, you can actually take a test and as an individual to see where you fit on this triangle. And this becomes a useful way to start managing cross-culturally. For example, if I've got a sales team that are working in different parts of the world, I really need to fill a vacancy in my China office, and I've got a great candidate in front of me, but they do this test and they show that they're actually a really multi-active way of thinking person, then maybe I'll be better placed putting them into my Colombia office rather than my China office, for example. So you can imagine that this becomes tools like this sort of cultural model could be a useful tool for an agile team to understand and empathize with each other. As a team, we can see where the different individuals sit on this cultural model. And it means that we can start building empathy with each other as a team. And this is important, as I'm going to talk about later. I want to also show you some of the other work that Lewis did. He created visualizations of different communication patterns. So this is the Finnish communication pattern. So we saw Mika Hakkinen earlier demonstrating this. So the Finns have a very narrow word base. They use minimal speech. If they hit a period of miscomprehension, they actually narrow their word base even further to get to clarity. So let's contrast that to another communication pattern. Say the Spanish. Much wider word base. The language is much more emotional and romantic. If the Spaniards hit miscomprehension, then they actually increase their word base. The language becomes more eloquent, richer, and this continues as relationships are formed and people actually get emotionally invested with each other. So they get to clarity by actually being more talkative than when they first meet. So you can see the contrast there between these two communication patterns. I'm going to show you one more, and it's only fair that we have a look at my own, so the English communication pattern. And again, if you've worked with British people or you work in a UK company, you might be familiar with this pattern. This is a pattern particular to English meetings. So when we go into meetings, we'll start with 5 to 10 minutes of small talk. We'll introduce our business almost as if it's an imposition. We'll try to make our proposal sound as reasonable as possible. If we hit resistance or miscomprehension, we keep calm. We resort to that coded speech. We might start using humor, stalling tactics, vagueness. We love our tea. The English love our tea, so we like to have our break, our recess, come back together, repackage what has been discussed, summarize the points that have been agreed, and decide that we're going to make a decision at the next meeting. So quite a big part of UK culture is lots of meetings. A meeting about a meeting, we see that quite a lot. So I can see some smiles, there's some nods in the chat window, so I think we've got real world experience of that. So again, understanding these communication patterns help us to understand each other and allow us to collaborate and communicate better. So Glaudia and we decided that we wanted to do some research in this area. There'd been very little written about this, so we decided to conduct some research ourselves. So we took some time out of our careers and we spent over 6 months traveling to different parts of the world. This goes back to 2018, before the pandemic. So we spent time traveling across South America, across Asia, parts of Europe, and then when the pandemic hit, we were kind of resorting to video calls, particularly with people in parts of Africa. So we covered Africa as well. These are just some of the pictures of the people that we met on our journey. So we're trying to answer that research question: what impact does culture have on Agile adoption? So we wanted to see how different practitioners were using Agile in the field. No, we didn't come to Nigeria. It's on our list. We did speak to some people in Nigeria. I saw in the chat window. So yeah, we've got some appreciation for Agile in Africa. So what I want to share is some of the examples, some examples of Agile in action from some of the places that we went to. I'm going to tie this back to some of the Agile values. So taking that first Agile value, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. A great example of this comes from Asia. That part of the world we probably saw the best team working. And an example of that was the widespread adoption of something called mob programming. And we saw this a lot in the Philippines, we saw this a lot in Japan. And mob programming is where the whole team come together as one unit working on one problem at a time. The way that mobbing works is there's one keyboard, one machine, one monitor, and the whole team working together, one person driving, other people making suggestions, brainstorming together how to get to the solution. So a little bit like pair programming, but now we're actually involving the whole team. And this is what such a widespread adoption in some parts of Asia that actually mob stations had actually been built. People didn't have their own desk. They actually came in and worked as part of a mob. So again, great demonstration of the teamwork and collaboration that we saw as part of those very people-orientated reactive cultures in the likes of Philippines and Japan. Another example comes from South America. This is a company that we visited in Buenos Aires in Argentina. I won't name them, but you can probably work out who they are from some of the t-shirts. Now, this company was known as the company without managers. They're famous throughout South America. They actually provide coaching to other companies in terms of their agility. So when we say the company without managers, that's exactly what they are. The founders had set up an environment where the teams were completely self-managing. There was no hierarchy, no job titles. There was just agile teams working directly with their clients. This is a picture taken at their end of the week come together. So all of the agile teams would come on the Friday afternoon, and each team would have a couple of minutes to talk about what was going well with them, what challenges they had, and what they were learning. They'd also come together and make decisions as a company. So which contracts to take, financial decisions, recruitment decisions, for example. And again, this was done by the collective. It was not done by the founders. One of the founders is actually in this picture. It's this guy here in the white t-shirt. And again, he's just observing, and just, their role as founders was to set up the environment to allow self-management to work. So self-management is a real big part of the agile mindset. We talk about that a lot, and this was a great example of self-management in action. Another example of self-management, we found two companies, there's one in Uruguay and one in Poland, that have actually gone to extremes of self-management. Now, when we talk about self-management in Agile, a lot of the time we're talking about teams or individuals deciding what they're going to work on and how they do the work. These two companies, like I say, one in Uruguay, one in Poland, had actually gone to even further extremes, where they were self-managing to the extent that they were deciding their own salaries. Okay, so the way that it'd work, there was some way to nominate yourself or one of your teammates to have a salary raise, and again, following peer reviews, that raise would be approved or not, regardless of what the managers or the leaders thought. They'd handed that control to the teams to own that. Required high levels of transparency of each other's salaries, transparency of the financial implications, the financial state of the company as a whole. But we talk about transparency a lot in the Agile space, but giving transparency, but also the power to actually do something with it as well. So extreme examples of self-management, yes, but these are real things that are happening with companies that are adopting agile mindsets in the world today. I want to share another story from a Scrum Master from Philippines, and they had actually moved to Japan. And if you know anything about the Philippines, you'll know that they had a number of years where they were occupied by the Spanish and then by the US. So those two countries have had a big impact on the Philippine culture. So the Philippine culture is very different to other parts of Asia, very different to Japan, where this Scrum Master had moved to. So this Scrum Master told us the story of the first retrospective that she ran with her Japanese Scrum team. And it was the mad, glad, sad format. So Spanish culture, big impact on the Philippine culture, very open, very relationship driven. In Japan, the culture is such where actually you don't show your emotions openly. And there's actually a saying called hono tatame, which basically means that we keep our emotions reserved for our close friends and our family only. So going in to do a retrospective and asking a Japanese team to talk about what are you mad about, what are you sad about, can have a really detrimental impact on how comfortable people feel having that conversation. So that retrospective was a bit of a disaster, she told us. She realized her mistake. She was very aware, did some research, and came back next retrospective and did a different format: start, stop, continue. Pretty much the same format, but just a different use of language, different use of terminology. And that had a much more successful interaction in that retrospective, just by this little nuance of the words used. And again, this is a good demonstration of the use of language that we use within a team and how that can impact how we work together. Looking at the value of working software over comprehensive documentation. So, big part of Agile is we're working iteratively and incrementally, because we want to get value to our customers and users as soon as possible, but also we want to get feedback on what we're building, what we're making. We want to get feedback to make sure that we're actually building the right thing. There's a couple of great examples that we found. A common practice that we see is creating prototypes, early versions of our products, and just testing them with the real users. We get out of the office, get down to the coffee shop, and just show our products as we're developing them to real people and getting their feedback. We saw an example of this in Chile, in Santiago, and this was a large North American bank that were branching out across South America. And their Agile team was actually doing this, taking their product out down to their local coffee shop and testing it with real users. And as I say, this was a bank. If we think about these sorts of organizations, we think of them as these really big organizations where there's lots of governance processes involved. You need to get approvals, and Agile isn't actually possible. These guys were showing that this idea of getting this fast feedback is possible, regardless of the size of the organization. So again, we can do Agile in those large financial institutions. Another question that we would ask very regularly was, how are you measuring your progress? How are you measuring your success? And at a lot of points in our journey, people would show us their burn down charts, their velocities, points completed, all these sorts of things. But particularly in Asia and South America, where those cultures are very people orientated, we saw that link to the customer. And a great demonstration of this was a team that we asked this question to in Colombia. How do you measure success? And one of their team members, after a moment's thought, answered, we measure our success by the size of the smile on our customer's face. And that, to me, is a great way of summing up why we're doing Agile. Okay, it's not about releasing features or sales or anything like that. It's actually getting closer to our customers, meeting their needs and meeting their expectations. And again, as we saw this time and time again across those more people-orientated cultures, where they're putting the customer at the center of everything they do. And I think we can learn from that way of thinking, particularly in the UK, but other parts of Europe and maybe in North America as well. So some great lessons there. So this takes us on to customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Let's talk about this value. I always like to slip in a Dilbert cartoon during my talks, so I'm just going to give you a moment to enjoy this one. This was actually published in 2014, so hopefully you can understand the frustration of the characters in this cartoon. So I think we've all been there, right? We're trying to work in an agile way, and yet we still need to deal with things like contracts, making sure that we've got sign off on things, and these are all things that causes delay. But we've kind of got to accept that really we need these things in place, because this is how we function, right? Well, again, Agile is challenging the way that we do contracts. Do we need to go through this process that could be causing delays, slowing us down? Now, contracts, I think it's an area of agility which is still emerging. I have written a blog about this, so if you want to know more about it, you can have a look at that blog. I'll share details at the end about how we are trying to change that we're doing contracts in a more agile way. One example that I'll share with you comes again from South America, and this is a team from a little software house. And rather than creating contracts, they would actually create what they called work agreements. What you see in screen is a real example. It's a complete work agreement that they have with one of their clients. So in here are things like their high-level objectives, the ways of working, how they're going to communicate, how they're going to collaborate, a high-level plan, and a budget. There's nothing in here about the scope, what is going to be delivered. Okay, it's more important for the way of working for this software development vendor that the agreement is actually how we're going to work together to meet our objective. Okay, that's going to ensure success, not a contract that says we're going to deliver this scope by this date. Okay, that's a false promise. So in here are things such as the client needs to make a person that can answer questions available to the team at least 50% of the time for the early sprints, for example. Okay, so making sure that those ways of working are set up and agreed to ensure success, not like this fixed time, scope, and budget contract that we're used to seeing. So much more agile way of thinking about how we work together. So that takes us to this idea of responding to change over following a plan. Now, if we wind the clocks back a little bit to the Industrial Revolution, the traditional management paradigm kind of grew out of what we did in the Industrial Revolution. And as an agile person, we can kind of look at it and sneer at it, but actually it was wildly successful. Waterfall, traditional ways of management, they were great, but they were great for a particular type of work. If we're building cars, if we're building houses, if we're building things on a factory line, it's what we call complicated work. Okay, it requires some skill, some training. It's difficult to do, but if we can create a blueprint, we can create a plan, and if we follow it, we get the same result every time. Now, Agile has come along because we're dealing with what we call complex work. Complex work is where actually there is no plan that we can create. Okay, when we're building software, when we're doing marketing, when we're doing sales, we're going to get different results every time we do it. And this is the difference. So I'm not here to bash traditional ways of managing and traditional ways of working. We just need a new paradigm to deal with the complex types of work that we're dealing with today. Now, we see in a lot of cultures, in my own in the UK, this is something that we're still kind of stuck in a little bit. We're still stuck in that industrial, traditional ways of managing, that traditional mindset. We see this in other parts of Europe as well. Germany is a good example. In Germany, German products are known for their great quality. We think of the likes of BMW and Porsche and Volkswagen. Well, maybe not Volkswagen so much these days, but you know what I mean. We're talking about German products are known for their great quality. Culturally, Germans are quite perfectionists. They want to get their products right before they put it to market. So the idea of agile adoption, where we're going to release incomplete products, is quite a challenge for the mentality there. So again, this is why we saw those articles appearing. Agile doesn't work in Germany, but actually, there are some examples. This is a company that we met. Again, I won't name them. You can probably work it out from the picture. But this is some of the people from their team. And we actually reached out to them because they provided a electronic tool that allowed you to give sort of online real-time feedback on media tools, so videos, PDFs, those sorts of things. We were actually looking at a tool to use for retrospectives. What was great was we were experimenting with a trial version of one of their early products, but they reached out to us and asked for feedback, and it was very personal. They wanted to know what we thought of it. Did we have suggestions? So they were open to the fact that actually they needed to evolve their product based on customer feedback. They weren't working in isolation trying to perfect their products. They were actually getting it out there, getting feedback, and much like that team that we saw earlier from the bank, they are trying to build what the customer wants, not what they think the customer wants. And again, that's a core part of agility. So again, showing that actually German companies like these guys are beginning to embrace this thinking. Another example that I'm going to share with you comes from Japan. Now, there's a term in Japanese culture called Namawashi. Namawashi basically translates to preparing the soil. And it's about building consensus for decisions so that everybody is aligned, so that when the decision is finally unveiled, we're all going in the same direction. Namawashi is very powerful. Although Japanese companies are very hierarchically structured, Namawashi means that actually the decisions are built consensually. So again, creates that alignment. It's not managers dictating direction. But like I say, when the decision is made, it's very powerful because everybody is heading in the same direction. Now, the problem with this is that it takes time. If we think about Japan in the wider context, the country was on its knees after the Second World War. And yet it went through an economic miracle in the decades that followed. It became the second biggest economy in the world. And then around the 1990s, it started to stagnate. It's been through this cycle of recessions and stagnation ever since the 1990s. And you've got to question, well, why is that? Could it be because of Namawashi? Since the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, more and more complex work has emerged. And we need that quick decision making. We need more agility. And we could argue that perhaps the Namawashi part of the Japanese culture is holding them back. If we look at something like Scrum with its product owner, that single decision maker, small teams, autonomous teams able to make quick decisions, something like Agile and Scrum could be the antidote to Namawashi and the stagnation in the Japanese economy. It's interesting that although a lot of the ideas from Agile come from Japan, Agile adoption isn't actually that widespread there. Okay, Toyota kind of made a lot of the lean ideas very popular, but it kind of never really went beyond Toyota. So these are just some of the examples that I wanted to share with you. Hopefully you get a feel that there's lots of different Agile adoptions, lots of different interpretations of Agile in different parts of the world. I could go on, could spend another hour giving you more examples of what we came across, but I think my time is starting to run down, and I do want to make sure that we've got time for Q&A. So let's wrap up. So I do want to, again, just flash up the book that Claudia and I wrote, Adopting Agile Across Borders. It includes discussions on cultural models that we've talked about today. We talk about Agile in different countries, but a big part of this book is contributions from real practitioners. We've got lots of stories, tips, tricks, case studies from real practitioners in different parts of the world. By the way, myself and Claudia are donating any profits to good causes, so hopefully you'll forgive me for this little plug. But I am going to give you the little punchline to the end of the book because I think this is really important. Now, we think about Agile teams. Agile teams exist to solve complex problems. Okay, that's why Agile came along. In order to solve complex problems, we need innovation and creativity. Now, there's a real opportunity here. The world pre-COVID and now that we're getting more back to normal, we're in a diverse world. It's more diverse than ever. Mobility, migration, technology has been a great enabler, and it means our organizations and our teams are more diverse than ever. And this is actually an opportunity. We can look at it as a threat, but we can look at it as an opportunity as well. The more diversity that we have in our teams and organizations, the wider spectrum of perspectives and views we can tap into. We can tap into that wider spectrum, which means that we can get a wider set of potential innovation and creativity. So there's an opportunity here. And there has been some research into this area. If we look at homogeneous teams at a particular baseline level of performance, if we compare diverse teams that haven't invested in understanding each other, building empathy, they haven't had good coaching, we actually see a lower level of performance because of those cultural clashes that we've talked about. But if we look at diverse teams that are coached well, they spend some time team building, understanding each other, they can actually get to higher levels of performance because of the greater innovation, the greater creativity that that diverse team brings. And I'm going to leave you with one example of this, a team that we met in Japan. So this team was made up of people from Japan itself, from the Philippines, from the US, from Canada, from Italy and Spain. So a very diverse team. Now, the Scrum Master told us the story that when they started, it was very chaotic. You had certain personalities dominating their meetings and their events, other ones that were very quiet and not really contributing. But very skilled Scrum Master understood that actually there was lots of clashes. So they spent time team building, understanding each other culturally, and actually they went on to become really high performing. They actually work at a small startup, and the startup has grown exponentially, and in no small part to this software development team that are part of that team. So a great example there of strength in diversity. So to sum up, so I believe that as Agile gains more and more momentum, the global community has got lots of things that we can learn from each other. Lots of stories, lots of tips, lots of those little nuances that we can try that has worked in one part of the world that might work in another part of the world. We believe that different cultural behaviors could be a strength or it could be an impediment to Agile adoption, but something that we should be coaching our teams and organizations through. So being aware of different cultural differences and communication styles is key to success, something that we can again think about. How do we bring this to the table, discuss it, and again, remove it as an impediment. Some cross-cultural training, awareness of things like the Lewis model or the Hofstadter model could help, especially where we've got multicultural or diverse teams. But we do believe that this diversity can be, we can treat it as an impediment, or we can, like I say, treat it as an opportunity to get to these higher levels of performance. What I want to leave you with is there's stories from all around the world. You've probably got your own experiences that although things like the Scrum framework, they're quite easy to learn, Agile adoption is hard. It takes time. Essentially, one way of thinking about it is adopting Agile is a culture shift itself. We are asking people to change their mindset, to change their behaviors. And this is not an easy thing to do. So I'm still optimistic. Okay, Agile has only been around for a couple of decades, while the traditional ways of management has been around for centuries. Okay, it's going to take time. We need perseverance, patience, and just keep going. But from what we've seen, with the right coaching, with the right approach, we do believe that Agile can work in any culture. Thank you so much for listening. This is the end of my talk. If you want to know more, on my company website, we've got a particular area for blogs, articles that we've written based on some of the visits that we did. So if you want to see some more case studies, you can go there. On our website as well, there is a blog around Agile contracts as well, so you can check that out if you want to know more. Let me have a look. I think we've got 5 minutes, just over 5 minutes left. So I will invite you, let's use the chat window. So if you've got any questions or comments that you want to share, please feel free to add them to the chat window and I'll answer as many as I can in the last 4 or 5 minutes. I can see that somebody asked around sharing the links to those articles I mentioned earlier. Let me dig those out and I'll send them via the meetup group after the session. So you should get that through the meetup. It'll probably be confusing to the other people that did sign up to the meetup and didn't arrive. Well, why they've suddenly got these links, but hey. Okay, just give you a moment to type your questions if we do have any. How are you doing, Daniela? Managed to stay awake? I know it's very early to you. Can we have the slide? So I'll liaise with the Agile Festival organizers. I do think, like I say, this session has been recorded. I believe I'll be sharing the slides with them. So I think the organizers will make the video and the slides available to anybody that wants them. What country was the team that had the working agreement? That example was from Chile. So that team was actually based in Santiago. Other examples of agile contracts, like I say, we write about this on the blog that I mentioned. There's a company in Singapore that was doing some interesting things as well. A very common way of doing contracts in an agile way is time and materials. There's a great example of how they took time and materials contracts to like a new level, based on ordering of product backlog and value of product backlog items, etc. So yeah, that could be a whole talk in itself, but yeah, check that out. Like I say, if you just Google our company name and agile contracts, that should come up on the first page. All right, what else? What other questions? I did see no communication pattern for African cultures. Yeah, sadly, again, I could just do I could probably do 2 hours on communication patterns. Richard Lewis, he's actually got a book which is nothing but communication patterns. Yeah, so we could have done some African ones as well, but yeah, we decided to go with Finland and Spain because of the nice contrast, and the English one, just because I felt like we had to point out the English style of meetings. Okay, I'm just going to give it 1 more minute. I will close the call shortly. I'm sure some of you have got lunch to get to, breakfast to get to in some cases, and some other talks to go to for the as part of the festival. One question. Let's do this one, then we'll wrap up. Did you have to adapt your communication with the different companies to get the information you needed? As part of our research, I think that's fair to say, yes. Example that jumps into my mind is in Japan, is very formal. We thought we were going to have a lot of problems getting into Japanese companies because they're probably more inward looking and not as open as some other cultures and companies. We managed to find some key people that are part of the Agile community, and we kind of built a relationship with them first, and that allowed them to do introductions. If you've ever been to a Japanese business meeting, for example, I mentioned that reactive culture is very ceremonial. So you've got to do the whole business card thing, right? Yeah, so you get yourself a stack of business cards. When you meet people, you hand the business card over, and it's actually a ceremony where you take it with 2 hands, you study it, you look at the person, study it some more, and like really show that you're you're absorbing that business card and the information on it that they've given you. If you just grab it and put it in your pocket, that's rude. So yeah, we did have to sort of build some cultural awareness of the different countries that we were working in. Contrast that to other parts of the world, the Mediterranean countries, those South American ones, a lot less formal. Yeah, meetings over coffee or a meal versus going to, like I say, sit down meetings in an office, for example. So yeah, definitely needed to adapt our style. Anything else? All right. 11:58, 11:59 now. I've actually managed to keep this within the time box. I'm very proud of myself as an Agile practitioner. Thank you so much for coming to my session. Have a great rest of the day and enjoy the rest of the festival for whatever other sessions you go to. Have a great rest of the day.
David, I'm going to reach out to you over LinkedIn because what I'd like to talk about is would blow the frame of a short 1 hour meetup. So what work by Aaron Mayer and my own work on strategy and culture
Sure.
intelligence.
Sure. Yeah. Feel free to reach out. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Yep. Go for it. Yep.
Thank you. Bye-bye, guys.